Forgotten Whispers numbers never lied to Nora Bailey. They were clean, predictable, and honest in ways people rarely manage to be. At 32, she had built her career at Wilson and Mercer Financial Services on the simple truth balance sheets. Didn't play games. Spreadsheets didn't have ulterior motives. And ledgers never made her feel small for preferring silence to small talk. "Bailey, my office," called Martin, her supervisor, his voice carrying across the open floor plan of cubicles. Nora gathered her tablet and followed, her sensible heels clicking against the polished floor. The glass walls of Martin's office offered no privacy, but at least they allowed her to see who was waiting inside: a man in a tailored charcoal suit who stood with his back to the door, gazing out at Seattle's skyline. "Nora, this is Vikram Mehta of Prism Innovations," Martin said, gesturing toward the visitor. "Mr. Mehta, Nora Bailey is our finest forensic accountant." The man turned, and Nora's practiced smile faltered slightly. Vikram Mehta had the kind of presence that commanded attention, tall with broad shoulders, deep brown eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw, and an expression that suggested he was perpetually calculating his next 3 moves. "Bailey," he said, extending his hand. His voice was unexpectedly soft for someone who looked like they could intimidate a boardroom with a glance. "Mr. Mehta," she replied, shaking his hand briefly before pulling away. "It's a pleasure." Martin cleared his throat. "Prism is looking to go public next quarter. They need someone to verify their books are impeccable before the SEC filing. I've assigned you as lead." Nora nodded, already mentally organizing the workflow such an audit would require. "I can start right away." "Good," Vikram said, studying her with an intensity that made her resist the urge to fidget. "Because we have 6 weeks to complete this, and I'm told your thoroughness is unmatched." 6 weeks is tight for a company your size," she noted, keeping her voice professional. A slight smile curved his lips. "I have confidence in your abilities, Miss Bailey. Martin speaks very highly of you." Over the next 3 weeks, Nora dove into Prism's financial records with the focus that had earned her reputation. Prism Innovations develops sustainable technology solutions, everything from biodegradable packaging to solar-powered irrigation systems. Their finances were complex, but surprisingly transparent, which was refreshing after some of the creative accounting she'd encountered in her career. She worked primarily from her office, communicating with Vikram's team through emails and conference calls. It was easier that way, maintaining professional distance, avoiding the awkwardness of in-person interactions, until the day Vikram himself appeared at her cubicle. "Ms. Bailey," he said, causing her to jump slightly in her chair, "I apologize for the intrusion, but I'd like to discuss some discrepancies in person." Nora swallowed, gesturing to the visitor's chair beside her desk. "Of course. What discrepancies?" "Actually," he replied, "I was hoping we could discuss this over lunch. I've been staring at spreadsheets all morning, and I could use a change of scenery." The invitation threw her. Lunch meant conversation. Conversation meant potential silences she wouldn't know how to fill. "I usually eat at my desk," she said, the words coming out more abruptly than intended. Vikram tilted his head slightly. "Just this once, perhaps you could make an exception. The restaurant downstairs has private booths. We can talk without interruption." Something in his tone, not demanding, not cajoling, simply matter of fact, made it difficult to refuse. With reluctance, Nora nodded and gathered her tablet. As they rode the elevator down, she couldn't help noticing how Vikram stood perfectly still. Unlike most people who shifted their weight or checked their phones, he seemed comfortable with silence in a way few others were, and for some reason, that made her own discomfort ease slightly. She had no way of knowing that this lunch would be the first of many conversations that would slowly, irrevocably change everything she thought she knew about herself. Calculated risks. The corner booth at Elm Street Bistro became their unofficial meeting spot over the next 2 weeks. What began as discussions about audit procedures and financial statements gradually evolved into conversations that stretched beyond the confines of spreadsheets and profit margins. "You have an unusual approach," Vikram noted one afternoon, watching as Nora methodically annotated her findings on her tablet. "Most auditors follow predictable patterns. You don't." Glanced up, momentarily caught off guard. "I follow the money where it leads." "Patterns make you miss things." Is that why you're so good at what you do? Because you see what others miss? She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. I just pay attention. To numbers, yes. But you pay attention. To everything, don't you? He leaned forward slightly. You noticed my CFO's hesitation when discussing the R&D expenditures before he even finished his sentence. You caught the inconsistency in dating formats across our international subsidiaries that even our internal team missed. Nora's neck. That's just being thorough. It's being exceptional, Vikram countered, his voice quiet but firm. You should own that, Ms. Bailey. Nora, she corrected him automatically, surprising herself. If we're going to be working this closely for the next month, you might as well call me Nora. A smile touched his lips. Only if you'll call me Vikram. As April turned to May, their working relationship settled into something Nora couldn't quite define. It wasn't exactly friendship. Vikram remained intensely private about his personal life, but a mutual respect had formed. It's punctuated by moments of unexpected connection. You need to come to our Portland facility, Vikram announced one morning. There are manufacturing cost allocations that make more sense when you see the operation in person. The prospect of traveling with him sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. I can review the documentation remotely. Some things can't be fully understood on paper. His expression softened slightly. It's just a day trip, the company jet. Leaves at 7 tomorrow morning. The company jet turned out to be a sleek Gulfstream that made Nora acutely aware of the vastly different worlds they inhabited. She sat rigidly in the buttery leather seat, clutching her tablet like a shield. First time on a private plane? Vikram asked, settling into the seat across from her. That obvious? You're counting exits and eyeing the safety card like it might be written in code. A hint of amusement colored his voice. Force of habit. I like knowing where I stand. And where exactly do you stand, Nora Bailey? The question felt weighted with meaning beyond the literal. She considered him carefully. On solid ground, whenever possible. Something flickered in his eyes' appreciation. Perhaps a wise policy. The Portland facility impressed her with its efficiency and innovative design. As they toured the manufacturing floor, Nora observed how differently Vikram interacted with his employees compared to other executives she'd encountered. He knew names, asked specific questions about projects, listened more than he spoke. You're not what I expected, she admitted as they walked the production line. And what did you expect? Someone more ... arrogant, detached, focused solely on profit margins, he supplied. Yes, she answered honestly. All of that. He stopped. Walking, turning to face her fully. My father built his business by stepping on anyone in his path. I watched what it cost him, not financially, but in every other way that matters. I decided long ago I wouldn't make the same mistakes. Rawness of his admission caught her off guard. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. You didn't. You observed and drew a conclusion based on available evidence. That's what you do. His expression grew thoughtful. But sometimes, Nora, the most important things aren't visible in any ledger. On the flight back, exhausted from the long day, Nora found herself sharing stories about her own path, her childhood fascination with puzzles, her scholarship to Northwestern, the quiet satisfaction she found in unraveling financial mysteries that others couldn't solve. What about you? She asked, surprising herself with her curiosity. How did you end up focusing on sustainable technology? Vikram gazed out the window at the darkening sky before answering. I spent a year after college traveling through regions devastated by climate change and industrial pollution. I saw communities that had lost everything because someone else decided their profit was more important than clean water or breathable air. His voice grew distant. I came home determined to prove that business success and environmental responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. That's admirable, Nora said softly. It's necessary, he corrected, and considerably more fulfilling than simply accumulating wealth for its own sake. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Nora realized with a start that she'd spent hours talking with Vikram without once feeling the awkwardness that usually plagued her social interactions. Something about his direct manner and thoughtful responses made conversation feel less like navigating a minefield and more like solving an interesting equation. When they parted at the airport, he paused before walking toward his waiting car. Thank you for today, Nora. For doing my job. For seeing my company as more than just numbers on a page. With that, he was gone, leaving her to wonder when exactly this audit had become something more complicated than she'd bargained for. Balance sheets, the Pacific Northwest Financial Forum, wasn't the sort of event Nora typically attended. She preferred analyzing reports to mingling with industry professionals. But Martin had insisted her presence was necessary given her role in the PRISM audit. Networking is part of advancement, Bailey, he'd reminded her. Can't hide behind spreadsheets forever. So she found herself in the grand ballroom of the Olympic Hotel, nursing a sparkling water and calculating how soon she could politely leave. Without damaging her professional reputation, "You look about as comfortable as I feel at these things," came a familiar voice. Nora turned to find Vikram beside her, impeccable in a midnight blue suit that made his normally imposing presence even more striking. "I didn't know you were attending," she said, oddly relieved to see a familiar face. "Last-minute decision. Our CFO was supposed to present, but his daughter went into labor this morning." He surveyed the crowded room with a barely concealed lack of enthusiasm. "I've always found these events to be more performance than substance. Then why come at all? Sometimes appearances matter in business, even when we wish they didn't." He nodded toward a small balcony off the main room. "Care to escape for a few minutes? I could use some air." The evening air carried the scent of salt water from the nearby sound, a welcome respite from the perfumed stuffiness of the ballroom. Seattle's skyline glittered before them, the Space Needle illuminated against the night sky. "Beautiful view," Nora commented, trying to ignore the way her heart had inexplicably accelerated. "It is," Vikram agreed, though when she glanced sideways, she found him looking at her rather than the CITYS. CAPE. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes before Vikram spoke again. "The audit's nearly complete." "Yes. Another week, maybe less. And then you'll move on to your next client." Something in his tone made her turn to face him fully. "That's how it works, is it?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne. "What if I told you I've been considering creating a permanent position for someone with your skills? Internal financial governance, ensuring we maintain the transparency we'll need as a public company?" Nora's breath caught. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting the possibility, if you were interested." The prospect was tempting in ways she hadn't anticipated. PRISM's mission aligned with values she respected, and the company culture Vikram had built was unlike anything she'd experienced elsewhere. And then there was Vikram himself, complication she hadn't allowed herself to fully examine. I need to think about it," she managed. He nodded, seeming to understand the weight of what he was proposing. "Of course," gust of wind sent a strand of her hair across her face. Before she could brush it away, Vikram's hand moved toward her slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. Gently, he tucked the strand behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. The simple touch sent an electric current through her body. Without thinking, she stepped backward, her back meeting the balcony railing. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, withdrawing his hand. That was presumptuous. "No, it's..." She swallowed hard, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his gaze. "I'm not good at this. Any of this." "At what exactly?" Words she'd never spoken aloud formed on her lips before she could reconsider. "People, closeness." She took a deep breath. I've never been kissed. Not properly. Not by someone who." She stopped, mortified at her own admission. Vikram went very still, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For one terrible moment, Nora was certain she'd made an irreparable mistake. Then he spoke, his voice impossibly gentle. "Thank you for trusting me with that." She blinked, confused by his response. "You're not surprised? Or amused? Should I be?" He moved to stand beside her at the railing, looking out at the city rather than at her, giving her space to compose herself. "We all have different paths, Nora, different priorities, different fears. Most people would find it strange. At my age, I'm not most people." He turned to face her then, his expression serious. "And I don't believe intimacy should be treated casually, despite what our culture suggests. There's something to be said for waiting until it matters. Tears pricked unexpectedly at her eyes, not from embarrassment, but from the simple relief of being understood rather than judged. She turned away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. But of course he had. Vikram noticed everything. "Nora," he said softly. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she met his gaze. "I would never presume to be the person you share that moment with," he said, each word measured and sincere. "But I want you to know something. Whoever earns that trust will be receiving a rare gift. Don't ever think otherwise." The unexpected validation broke something open inside her chest, a tight protected space she'd guarded for years. A single tear escaped despite her best efforts. Vikram reached into his pocket and offered her a crisp handkerchief. The gesture somehow both old-fashioned and perfectly in character. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the handkerchief." He nodded once, understanding. "We should probably return before we're missed." As they walked back toward the glittering ballroom, Nora realized that something fundamental had shifted. Between them, a truth had been spoken, acknowledged, and accepted, creating a new equilibrium that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The numbers between them no longer added up the way they once had, for the first time in her carefully ordered life. Nora wasn't sure she wanted them to. Reconciliation. The final days of the audit proceeded with a new undercurrent of tension that neither Nora nor Vikram acknowledged directly. Their interactions remained professional on the surface, discussions of regulatory requirements, final verification procedures, documentation standards, but beneath ran a current of heightened awareness that made even the most mundane exchanges feel charged with unspoken significance. Nora threw herself into the work with even greater intensity, as if perfect precision might somehow restore the clear boundaries that had begun to blur. She worked late into the evenings at the office, preferring the solitude of empty hallways to the confusing complexity of Vikram's presence. It was during one such late night, as she combed through the last of the international subsidiaries' reports, that her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Are you still at the office?" She stared at the screen, wondering how he'd obtained her personal number before remembering it was in her email signature. After a moment's hesitation, she typed back, "Yes. Final review of Singapore operations." The response came almost immediately. "Have you eaten?" She hadn't. But admitting that felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. Before she could decide how to respond, another message appeared. "I'm still here too. 14th floor. I ordered food." Too much for one person. 14 floors separated them, a simple elevator ride that somehow felt more consequential than it should. Nora sat motionless, weighing options, calculating risks and possibilities as she would a complex financial problem. Finally, she stood, gathered her tablet, and headed for the elevator. Vikram's office occupied the corner of the executive floor, with floor 2 ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city and Elliott Bay beyond. When the elevator doors opened, Nora found the floor mostly dark, except for the warm glow emanating from his open door. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Vikram at his desk, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, tie loosened, surrounded by stacks of papers and several open containers of what smelled like Thai food. He looked up, a tired smile crossing his features when he saw her. "You came?" "You mentioned food," she replied lightly, trying to dispel the sudden tension in her chest. "A shameless bribe." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Pad Thai or green curry?" "Curry, if you don't mind." They ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Vikram spoke again. "I owe you an apology." Nora looked up, surprised. "For what?" "Making things uncomfortable between us." He set down his fork, meeting her gaze directly. "What you shared at the hotel, that was personal, not professional. I should have maintained clearer boundaries." "You didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. "I'm the one who overshared. Is that what you think happened? That you revealed too much of yourself?" She looked away. "Isn't it?" "No." His voice was firm. "What happened was human connection. Rare and valuable and complicated, yes, but not wrong." Nora studied the contents of her container, struggling to find the right words. I don't know how to do this, Vikram. Do what? Navigate, whatever this is becoming. He was silent for a long moment. Neither do I, he finally admitted. But I think it might be worth figuring out. Before she could respond, his phone rang. Sharply, he glanced at the screen, frowning. I need to take this. Excuse me? He answered, his expression quickly shifting from annoyance to concern. When? How bad? Yes, I understand. I'll be there within the hour. He ended the call, already standing and reaching for his jacket. There's been a fire at the Portland facility. No injuries, but significant damage to the East Wing. Oh my God, Nora said, rising as well. What happened? Still determining the cause. I need to get down there immediately. He hesitated, then added, Would you come with me? Your knowledge of our operations could be invaluable in assessing the financial impact and dealing with the insurance adjusters. The request was reasonable. Professionally, they both recognized it as something more. She said after only a moment's consideration. I'll need to grab a few things from my office. The company helicopter is being prepped. We leave. From the rooftop in 20 minutes, the next 48 hours blurred into a haze of emergency meetings, insurance documentation, and damage assessments. They worked side by side with barely a break, moving seamlessly between professional roles and something less defined, but equally effective. A partnership that transcended job descriptions. Nora watched as Vikram handled the crisis with the same thoughtful composure he brought to everything, reassuring employees, coordinating with emergency services, communicating transparently with stakeholders. Not once did he lose his temper or shift blame, even when it emerged that the fire had started due to a maintenance procedure that hadn't followed proper protocols. People make mistakes, he told her quietly as they surveyed the damaged manufacturing floor. What matters is how we respond to them. By the second evening, with the immediate crisis stabilized and recovery plans in place, exhaustion finally caught up with them. They sat in the small conference room that had become their temporary headquarters, surrounded by empty coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches. You should get some rest, Vikram said, noticing Nora stifling a yawn. There's a hotel across the street. I've booked rooms for both of us. She nodded, too tired to argue. What about you? I'll join you shortly. Just need to finish this statement for the press. At the hotel, Nora showered and changed into the t-shirt and sweatpants an assistant had purchased for her. Since she'd had no time to pack, she was about to collapse into bed when a soft knock sounded at her door. Vikram stood in the hallway, looking as exhausted as she felt, holding 2 mugs of what smelled like chamomile tea. Peace offering, he said, for dragging you into this chaos. She accepted the mug, stepping back to let him enter. You didn't drag me. I chose to come. He sat in the armchair by the window while she perched on the edge of the bed, both of them, sipping their tea in the comfortable silence of shared fatigue. Thank you, he said eventually. For everything these past 2 days, you went far beyond what anyone could have expected. That's what partners do, she replied without thinking, then felt heat rise to her cheeks as she realized the ambiguity of her words. Vikram's gaze met hers, something vulnerable flickering in his usually composed expression. Is that what we are, Nora? Partners? The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. I think, she said carefully, we might be something that doesn't have a simple definition yet. A smile touched his lips, tired but genuine. I can accept that answer. For now, he stood to leave, pausing at the door. Whatever we are, or might become, I want you to know that I'm not in any rush. Some things are worth waiting for. As the door closed behind him, Nora realized that, for the first time in her meticulously ordered life, she was embracing an equation with unknown variables and finding that the uncertainty held its own kind of exhilarating promise. Audited heartstrings arrived with uncharacteristic warmth for Seattle, as if the weather itself had decided to mark the transition taking place in Nora's carefully structured life. The Prism audit was complete, her final report submitted and approved. Professionally, her obligation to Vikram's company had ended. Personally, nothing felt concluded at all. She sat in Martin's office, listening as he praised her work and outlined her next assignment, a tech startup in Bellevue with promising financials but questionable accounting practices. Les Martin added, studying her with unusual perception, you've decided to accept Meta's offer. News traveled fast in their industry. I haven't given him an answer yet. May I speak frankly, Bailey? She nodded, bracing herself. In the 10 years you've been with this firm, I've never seen you hesitate over a career decision. You analyze, you decide, you move forward. He leaned back in his chair. The fact that you're deliberating suggests this isn't purely a professional consideration. Nora's gaze dropped to her hands. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. Martin's voice softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think you and Prism would be an excellent fit. And if there are other factors influencing your decision, well, life's too short not to explore where they might lead. She left his office with more questions than answers, walking the familiar path to the waterfront where she often went to think. The ferry terminal bustled with activity tourists taking photos, commuters rushing to catch departures, seagulls circling hopefully above it all. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Vikram. Coffee at our usual place? 4 p.m.? Our usual place. The simple phrase carried a weight of shared history that had somehow accumulated in just a few months. She typed back a quick affirmative, ignoring the flutter in her stomach that had become a familiar response to any communication. From him, Elm Street Bistro was quiet in the late afternoon lull between lunch and dinner. Vikram was already there when she arrived, seated at their corner booth, 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. Perfect timing, he said, as she slid into the seat across from him. I just got off a call with the insurance adjusters. The Portland facility should be fully operational again by August. That's faster than expected, she noted, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Your team has done amazing work. Our team, he corrected gently, your guidance through the recovery process, has been invaluable. The pronoun choice wasn't accidental, and they both knew it. Nora took a deep breath. About that, I've been thinking about your offer, and I have questions. A smile touched his lips. Of course you do. If I were to join Prism, what exactly would my role entail? Where would the boundaries be drawn between professional collaboration and whatever else might exist between us? Vikram considered her questions with the thoughtfulness she'd come to expect from him. Your title would be Chief Compliance Officer, reporting directly to the board rather than to me to maintain independence. Your responsibility would be ensuring that as we grow, we maintain the ethical standards and transparency that are core to our mission. He paused. As for the second part of your question, that would be entirely up to you, Nora. If you decide the personal aspect is too complicated, I would respect that completely. And if I didn't, decide that, I mean. His expression grew serious. Then, we would navigate it carefully, with clear communication and mutual respect. I would never want your professional accomplishments overshadowed by a personal relationship. She nodded, processing his answer. People would talk. People always talk. What matters is whether we allow their opinions to dictate our choices. Nora traced the rim of her coffee cup, gathering courage for her next question. And what if? What if whatever this is between us doesn't work out? But then we would handle it with maturity and ensure it didn't impact the company or your position within it. His gaze met hers steadily. But Nora, I should be clear about something. I don't enter into relationships of any kind, casually or without careful consideration. If we were to explore this connection between us, it wouldn't be a passing interest. For me, the simple honesty of his statement made her throat tighten unexpectedly. I need to think about it. All of it. Take all the time you need, he said, reaching across the table to briefly touch her hand, the first deliberate contact between them since that night on the hotel balcony. I'm not going anywhere. Later that evening, alone in her apartment, overlooking Lake Union, Nora did what she always did when facing a complex decision. She created a spreadsheet, 2 columns, reasons to accept Vikram's offer, reasons to decline. Under accept, she typed, meaningful work, company values align. With personal ethics, professional growth opportunities, independence within role. Vikram. She paused at the last entry. Considering the implications of listing a person, his intelligence, his integrity, the way he listened as if her words mattered, how he'd never once made her feel less than for the things that made her different as a reason for a career move. Under decline, she wrote, professional complications. Office gossip. Risk of heartbreak. Fear. She stared at the last word for a long time. Throughout her life, caution had served her well, keeping her focused on academic achievement when her peers were distracted by social dramas, helping her build a reputation for unimpeachable professional judgment, protecting her from the messy vulnerability that seemed to cause others so much pain. But caution had also kept her isolated. Watching life from a safe distance, rather than experiencing it fully, a memory surfaced, her mother's voice from years ago. After Nora had declined yet another social invitation, being safe isn't the same as being happy, sweetheart. At the time, she'd dismissed the comment as the kind of platitude people offered when they didn't understand why someone preferred solitude to forced socialization. Now, she wondered if there had been more wisdom in those words than she'd recognized. Next morning, she called Martin and declined the Bellevue assignment. Then she texted Vikram, "Can we meet? I've made my decision." They met at the waterfront park near Pike Place Market. Walking slowly along the promenade as ferries crossed the Sound and seagulls wheeled overhead. "I've accepted a position with another company," Nora said finally. Vikram's steps faltered slightly before he composed himself. "I see. May I ask where?" "Prism Innovations." She turned to face him fully. "If the offer still stands?" The smile that spread across his features transformed his usually serious expression into something radiant. "It absolutely does."
"Oh, there would
"Need to be clear boundaries," she continued. "Professional parameters that we both respect, regardless of what happens personally." "Agreed, and I want to take things slowly, very slowly." Vikram nodded. "At whatever pace feels right to you." They had stopped walking, standing face to face with the Sound stretching behind them, the late afternoon sun casting everything in golden light. "There's one more thing," Nora said, her heart beating so rapidly she was certain he must be able to hear it. "When I decide I'm ready, I want you to be the one." He understood immediately what she meant, his expression softening with an emotion she couldn't quite name, but that made her chest ache in the best possible way. "I would be honored," he said simply. "Whenever that day comes, if it comes." "It will," she replied with a certainty that surprised her. "I just need time." He agreed, holding out his hand to her as something I'm happy to give. She placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both ordinary and profound. It's a simple connection that promised the possibility of deeper ones to come. As they continued their walk along the water's edge, shoulders occasionally brushing, Nora realized that for the first time in her life, she was embracing an equation without knowing the exact solution. But she was beginning to understand that some of life's most valuable calculations couldn't be resolved with perfect precision. They required faith, courage, and the willingness to discover the answer together, one step at a time. In the balance sheet of her life, she had finally found an asset worth the risk of investment, not just in Vikram, but in the person she might become by allowing herself to be truly seen, truly known, and perhaps someday soon, truly loved.